In 1999, NASA built a spacecraft, sent it all the way to Mars, and lost it. Not because of a meteor, not because of a technical malfunction, because two teams of rocket scientists couldn't agree on whether to use meters or feet. This is the true story of the Mars Climate Orbiter, and how one of the most preventable mistakes in space history cost over $300 million. The Mars Climate Orbiter. Let's set the scene. NASA launches the Mars Climate Orbiter on December 11, 1998. Its job: study the Martian atmosphere and weather, and act as a communications relay for another mission landing on Mars shortly after. The spacecraft itself cost about $125 million to build. Add the launch, operations, and everything else, and the total mission price tag comes out to around $327 million. For 9 months, the spacecraft cruises through space toward Mars. Everything looks normal, until it's time for the most critical maneuver of the entire mission: orbit insertion. This is the moment the spacecraft needs to fire its thrusters at exactly the right time, for exactly the right duration, to slow down and slip into a stable orbit around Mars. Get this wrong, and you either bounce off into deep space, or you come in too low and burn up in the atmosphere. Here's where it gets interesting. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory built the navigation software, and it was designed entirely around the metric system, Newton seconds to be specific, which measure the force of the thrusters over time. But the company that built the spacecraft's thrusters, Lockheed Martin, sent NASA the thruster performance data using a completely different unit: pound force seconds. That's the imperial system. Nobody caught it. The navigation software took the imperial numbers and treated them as if they were metric. No conversion, no warning, no red flag in the system. To put the size of this error in perspective, 1 pound force is about 4.4 times stronger than 1 Newton. So every single calculation involving the spacecraft's thruster firings was off by roughly that same factor, over 4 times more force being calculated than was actually being applied. Over the course of the 9-month journey, this tiny repeated miscalculation slowly nudged the spacecraft's trajectory off course, just a little bit each time. Not enough to notice immediately, but more than enough to matter by the time it reached Mars. On September 23, 1999, the Mars Climate Orbiter approached the planet for orbit insertion. Based on the corrupted calculations, Mission Control believed the spacecraft would pass about 150 kilometers above the Martian surface. Close, but safe. In reality, it was on a path to pass somewhere between 50 and 60 kilometers above the surface. Way too low. At that altitude, atmospheric friction and heat would be far more intense than the spacecraft was designed to survive. Investigators believe the orbiter either burned up in the atmosphere or skipped off it entirely and was flung into a useless orbit around the sun. Either way, NASA lost contact. The spacecraft was gone. The investigation that followed was almost painfully simple in its conclusion. This wasn't a single dramatic failure. It was a basic communication breakdown between two teams who never double-checked that they were speaking the same mathematical language. NASA's own mission requirements explicitly called for metric units throughout the project, but that requirement got lost somewhere in the handoff between contractors, and nobody built in a system to catch the mismatch before it became catastrophic. What makes this story sting a little more is just how avoidable it was. This wasn't some impossible-to-predict cosmic event. It was the kind of mistake that happens when you mix up tablespoons and teaspoons in a recipe. Except the recipe was a multi-million-dollar spacecraft, and the kitchen was outer space. After the failure, NASA overhauled its verification processes. Future missions would require far stricter cross-checking between contractors, more rigorous unit standardization, and better communication protocols between teams working on the same spacecraft. So what's the actual lesson here? It's not really about metric versus imperial units. It's about what happens in any complex system, whether it's a spacecraft, a company, or a project with multiple teams, when nobody is responsible for double-checking that everyone's actually speaking the same language. The individual engineers weren't incompetent. The science wasn't wrong. The math on each side was internally consistent. The failure happened in the gap between teams, in the assumption that someone else had already checked. And in high-stakes systems, that gap is exactly where disasters live. If you like this, subscribe to Pocket History for more of history's strangest, dumbest, and most unbelievable moments, every week. Got a weird historical event you want covered next? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one.